Hey, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for a really important discussion on our topic today, which is life on the line, supporting men's mental well-being in a tough-it-out culture. We've got a great turnout for today's conversation and really excited to get into a topic that's obviously very relevant at this time of year and also something that we're recognizing is super important to focus on as we're moving forward in society here today. So my name is Jesse Fair, and I'm an impact analyst here at Headversity. And I have with me here today Brad Blaisdell. Brad's the Vice President of Workplace Solutions and Compliance at Respect Group. Thanks so much for joining me today, Brad.
Thanks, Jesse. I'm really pleased to be here.
Awesome. And so the goal of today's session is to be pretty conversational. So Brad and I are going to engage in a bit of a discussion, a back and forth. But as we're doing that, what we're going to do is leave the chat open during the Zoom for the during the entire session. And if you have any thoughts or comments or anything that you feel like would add to the presentation, we would love to hear from you. Your feedback allows us to kind of get deeper into the conversation and just really make sure that we're kind of addressing the questions and ideas that come up as you're hearing us speak. And so, please feel free to be engaged. And one way that we're actually going to support that is that throughout the presentation, we actually have poll questions built in. And so what you'll be able to do is just take out your cell phone, and a QR code will pop up, and you'll be able to scan that QR code and then actively participate in the poll discussions as they're going live. So that's also going to help us get some feedback and help guide some of our conversation as we move ahead here today as well. So, but with that, we just wanted to give you a quick introduction for both Brad and myself. I'm a born and raised Calgarian. I grew up, and like a lot of Canadian young men, sports were a huge part of my life. I was very fortunate to be able to use sports to help me pursue an education in the United States. And so I played lacrosse throughout university, first at Harvard University, where I did my undergraduate degree in psychology, and then at Duke University, where I did my master's degree in management studies. After I finished playing lacrosse in university and completing my education there, I was able to go on and play professional lacrosse for a number of years and operate a business that was focused on coaching and mentoring young athletes who had similar goals to my own. And so what I learned throughout those experiences is that in very traditional masculine environments, that maybe men, and myself included, didn't have as good of an idea about their mental health or really how to even engage about their mental health as maybe we thought that we did. And that realization has kind of led me on the path to a point now where I'm actually completing my master's in counseling psychology with the goal of becoming registered as a psychologist here in Alberta so that I can help to continue the conversation in regards to mental health and help people work towards just improved levels of mental well-being. And so that's a little bit about myself, and with that I'll just pass it over to Brad to introduce himself.
Thank you, Jesse. Hi, my name is Brad Blaisdell, and I'm the Vice President of Workplace Solutions and Compliance at Respect Group and Headversity. I am married joyously for the last 36 years to a wonderful woman, Roseanne, and I have 4 amazing young adult children. And my background consists of a lot of different industry sectors, business development, operational effectiveness, and really working with people and organizations to optimize performance. And I've had the privilege for the last, coming up on 13 years, to be working with Respect Group, Sheldon Kennedy and Wayne McNeil. And we basically do respect certification in sport, schools, and workplaces. So enable organizations to become respect certified. I'm really privileged to be here today. Mental health is a very, very important topic, and we definitely need to be talking about it a lot more, especially men. And I'm very pleased again to have this conversation and look forward to a lot of input from people as well as the conversations that Jesse and I will have. Yeah, over to you, Jesse.
Absolutely awesome, Brad. Really appreciate that. And and I think that kind of brings us to the opening of our presentation today, and it's really why we are all here. And it is November. November has now commonly become known as Movember. And I think one thing that's quite noticeable about myself is that I have a mustache, and Movember originated with men growing mustaches in support of prostate cancer in 2003. And what actually has happened is that over the course of time, it's been an incredibly successful movement that's raised a ton of money for different causes. And most recently, actually, the focus has shifted towards men's mental health, which we now know is obviously such an important topic to be focused on. And my mustache is actually a product of a men's mental health initiative in Movember a few years ago, where a friend and I both kind of took a look at our own lives and the lives of some of our friends and said, hey, again, maybe things aren't as great as they need to be, and maybe there's something that we can do to really try and support this a little bit better. And so I grew a mustache then, and I've kind of kept it as a reminder of the importance of continuing that conversation as we move ahead. And so what this actually brings us into is those poll questions that I was mentioning at the beginning of this session. And so if you actually take out your phone right now, you're going to be able to scan that QR code on the screen. And what it's going to do is bring up a poll question. And so as I'm talking along here, you're going to be able to provide the answer. And so we can kind of discuss and engage as a group in regards to that answer. And so our first question is, for the men out there and anybody with men in their life, when you think of your own or their own experience, have you or they ever felt hesitant to discuss mental health issues in the workplace? And so one example that I think really illustrates this point quite nicely is, the idea of if you had to call in sick, into sick to work, if you just had the flu, picking up the phone, making that call to your boss is a relatively easy call to make, right? We've all had to make that call before. But if you, instead of being sick with the flu, if you were sick with, say, a panic attack or an anxiety attack, would you have that same confidence or would you have that same thought to pick up that phone and make that call? And if the answer is no, then that really is an early example of how the stigma around mental health topics still exists in our workplace. And so, Brad, what I'm curious from you is, have you ever experienced this hesitancy kind of in your life?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and it's interesting. Prior to my career at Respect Group and Headversity, there were certain leaders and leadership that I had no problem having, deep conversations about mental health and my particular mental health, like how I'm feeling. But there were others that clearly I'd be hesitant to have those conversations in fear of reprisal or bad things happening. But I think, character builds culture, and, the best leaders that I've ever worked for create a safe environment where people feel safe to discuss how they're feeling, bring issues forward, and not feel fear of doing so. So I've had wonderful leaders that really practice that on a regular basis, and I'm fortunate enough to be with Respect Group and Headversity, and we walk the talk around mental health and wellness and creating psychological safety in workplaces. So I talk mental health every day with clients.
Yeah.
And how are you proactively addressing that in your organization? So, I like to look at it like, the car can appear shiny, but really it might not be running 100% under the hood.
Yeah.
And, we need to be able to have conversations and feel safe to open up the hood and say, hey, I'm not feeling that great today. I'd like to bounce something off you. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today, is just to have these conversations. And so what about you, Jesse?
Yeah, well, and I think it's something that I've definitely experienced in my own life, Brad. And I think like what I'd mentioned earlier is that idea of that stigma still existing, right? Is that if you would hesitate to pick up the phone and truly tell somebody that, an issue that you're having is related to a mental health challenge, it makes me feel a certain type of way versus having to just call in for a regular, flu or something like that. And so I still think it's something that's important to highlight because at the end of the day, illness is illness, or it's a matter of, we want to be getting people the support that they need regardless of what's actually going on. We want to be helpful, right? So and I think that what it all kind of comes down to is that that stigma still exists in so many different ways in our society, right? Like we have this idea of systemic stigma, which is like a bigger picture issue. An example would be not renting an apartment to somebody because they had a history of, say, substance abuse, or potentially overlooking a candidate for internal promotion within an organization because they'd had challenges with mental health in the past. And so
Right.
those larger scale kind of stigmas that make it difficult for people. And then the other two types of stigma that are really, really still prevalent and difficult to deal with is that the idea of a public stigma, so people in society rejecting, being a bit fearful, avoiding those who have mental illness or those who are different than ourselves, which can show up in really simple ways like, if somebody says, hey, everybody has anxiety, you're just not strong enough to deal with it. And it's like, that's not the most helpful thing to be saying to somebody because it really devalues their experience. And we're not really sure how severe or significant that anxiety actually is. Only that person really knows, right? So that's where we can actually talk and help them. And then finally, there's that idea of like that self-stigma where if I'm having thoughts that I'm defective, I'm broken, I'm bad, I'm not going to pick up the phone and communicate what's truly going on, which really prevents us from getting that help that we need. And this stigma shows up in really kind of devastating ways for people where if they have existing conditions, it exacerbates those symptoms that they can experience. It can increase the amount of loneliness that people experience, which is really negative over time, creating a lot of social isolation for people. And then, like we'd mentioned, fewer opportunities for work, for school, for family connection, different things like that, which can be really destructive in people's lives. And then ultimately, that's just feeding into a feeling of helplessness or hopelessness that then kind of creates a really repetitive cycle where people can kind of get trapped there. And so it's really important that we help people address these things earlier on so that we can kind of get ahead of them and prevent that cycle from really kind of deepening over time.
Oh, that's great.
And I think just to finish a last thought on that, Brad, is that there's this a particular type of stigma that men are still struggling with, which I think leads us into our next poll question pretty nicely. And it's this idea of like a masculine identity or a masculine resilience. And so for the audience out there and for yourself, Brad, it's when you think about traditional qualities of handling challenges with masculine resilience, what words or phrases kind of come to mind for you when you kind of hear that question?
Well, I think what we're really seeing is like we're operating with outdated gender norms, and growing up in an environment where you as a male felt I need to be a provider. I need to suck it up. I need to really bottle up my emotions and not show weakness. And those norms have to be broken, and they're outdated and they're very damaging. Every human being has a brain, and every human being has emotions and feelings. And why is it okay for women to be, it's normal for them to have conversations about their feelings and emotions, but it's not okay for men?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really think having these opportunities like this today and just continuing the conversation about the importance of men feeling safe and open to have true connection and look for that at every opportunity you have. I just think we have great opportunities to really elevate men's mental health and champion why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, I think like one thing that I've been able to kind of just learn in recent years is that research shows, Brad, that there's no difference between the way that men and women actually do experience those emotions. I shouldn't say that they experience them at the rates that they experience them. So men and women both feel emotions equally, but it's kind of tied to what we've talked about, where society has become less accepting of men displaying particular types of emotions or displaying emotions in certain ways, like crying, for example. Where that has kind of become weak or associated with something that's not traditionally masculine. And ultimately, that's based upon just a misguided notion of what it is to be stoic or around stoicism. And so, I think it's become misunderstood as this idea that we need to master our emotions in order to control them. But realistically, you can't dominate your emotions into submission. What we're really looking to do is learn how to feel them, how to experience them, and then really develop healthy ways to respond to those emotions, not ignore them, right? Because when we ignore them or we try to bury them, what we get is men, acting out when, say, they feel sad, that showing up as something more along the lines of, say, anger or frustration, which can cause really, again, like we talked about, negative outcomes for people over the course of their lives. Typically, angry people are very lonely people. And so when men don't feel that they're able to express those emotions in a really healthy way, it can, again, create those barriers or those blocks that are going to help keep those people stuck in those more challenging or detrimental positions in their life. And so, it's something that we really kind of need to continue to be mindful of as we move forward here. And I think, that's something that, again, just the more that we talk about this stuff, the better that we can all get at understanding that it is good and it is okay to express these emotions and to be vulnerable at times.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the current state of men's mental health. Jesse, what are some of the unique challenges men face related to mental health? And can you break down some of the stats for us that our audience is seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, where we can start here, Brad, is just to highlight the fact that overall men are 2 times more likely to binge drink than women. And what we also know is that 80% of alcohol abuse is diagnosed in men. Alcohol is a depressant. Increased consumption of alcohol drives bad decisions, which ultimately drives worse outcomes. And so the next stat on this page, highlighting the fact that men are dying by suicide at a rate that's 4 times higher than that of women. And when they're dying, they're actually significantly more likely to have been drinking while they make that attempt on their life. So this idea of how men's drinking habits, how that's leading into more negative outcomes is something to be very, very aware of, right? If you see somebody in your life that's potentially struggling with the substance abuse, knowing how quickly that can escalate and make the other challenges, if they have potentially other mental illness with that as well, it can create something called a dual diagnosis, where one issue is exacerbating the other one. So they're fueling each other up, which can make recovery really difficult for those people. So we need to get them that support as soon as possible. Yeah. And then, kind of continuing on with that, another, obviously very sad stat is that, males are accounting for 81% of drug overdoses, and that's stats from BC. And what we're starting to be able to see is a pathway to this outcome, where currently in Canada, 93% of workplace fatalities are actually males. And in terms of serious injury that gets experienced while at work, males are also at risk or at elevated risk compared to women of experiencing those serious injuries as well. And in particular, men that are in blue-collar jobs, right? More jobs like the trades. Mm-hmm. And when people experience these injuries, oftentimes they go to a doctor, they're prescribed opioids as a painkiller. And what we now know about opioids is they're incredibly addictive, right? And that over time, depending on what else is happening in that person's life, it can lead to this pathway where that person now ends up, on the street, unable to care for themselves, and then ultimately potentially overdosing, which is, an outcome that we'd love to be able to remove from reality. So it's really important we understand how people get there so that we can support them before it gets really bad, right? We want to be preventative, which is super important. And then just finally, a stat about loneliness, and loneliness is really, we've mentioned it a few times, it can be a really destructive force in people's lives. Mm-hmm. And so in 18 to 34-year-old men, 63% of them were experiencing considerable loneliness and isolation when compared to women of a similar age. And so satisfying social relationships, they're essential for our well-being. And so if we're not having those, that loneliness can lead to depression, alcohol abuse, sleep deprivation, and ultimately it can actually cause cancer, which is an incredibly terrible outcome. And so, like we mentioned before, the loneliness can drive increased anger, increased frustration, which helps keep people trapped. So again, the goal is to be preventative, get in front of these things now that we're aware of them, and so how we can truly support men before they get to that really, really negative bad point. And I guess that's a nice transition kind of into our next slide here, which is actually going to be a video. And before we play the video, I did just want to note, that this video addresses themes of mental health and suicide that some of our viewers may find a little bit distressing. So the video is going to be about 2.5 minutes long. So we'll play the video and the presentation will continue after. But if that's not something that you feel like you're up for viewing currently, please feel free to kind of just turn off your sound, look away from your screen, and we'll pick up the presentation afterwards. But for those of us that are interested, we'll dive into that video now. And so I know a little bit of a technical glitch there where the sound wasn't playing, but the real audio of the video is mostly just kind of stadium noise. And that was why we also included the subtitles, just to make sure that people could still kind of get the very subtle dialogue that was going on. So we apologize for that, but nonetheless, the message of the video is still obviously incredibly powerful. And I know it kind of makes me, think and feel a number of different things. But I'm really curious, Brad, to kind of just hear your thoughts after watching that.
Well, before we prepared for today, I was able to watch that video and another presentation that you did, Jesse, and it really hits home. Getting back to the shiny car, not realizing what's really going on under the hood, and that video is brilliant in showing on the outside people in your life might look fine, they might look optimistic, they might show a shiny cover, but unless you have conversations as to really how are you doing and get to that level, it's a real challenge, and a lot of people do not want to show that they're struggling, and that's just a perfect example. And unfortunately, the individual ended his life, and I think a lot of people out there have experienced similar circumstances where they wish they would have had a conversation. They wish they could have done more, and and that's why we're having these discussions today. When you talk about having these conversations, you really need to know how to have these conversations, and that kind of segues nicely into what we call care conversations. And at Respect Group and Headversity, a framework that we use to help people understand how to have those difficult conversations, and you'll see that on the slide, is called the CARE framework. And really there's 4 steps in the CARE framework. The first one is creating time and space. You know, ensuring that the space that you're having the conversations is appropriate, it's private, comfortable, and free from distractions. A, for attending to the situation, you know, letting the person share fully without interruptions. You know, don't try and solve the problem yourself. You're there to listen and really show empathy and care for the individual. And then R, responding empathetically, if necessary, addressing where the person or the resources that are available to help as far as professionals, so they do get the help that they need. And I think, Jesse, you're going to talk a little bit more about, we're not here to fix the problem. You know, we're not therapists, at least I'm not. Jesse, you're in a better position than I am, but I can have conversations with people and really build the trust with them so they feel that I legitimately care about how they're doing, and I'm there for them. And that's really what we're all about. And then earmark time is the final step. And it's critical that the individual doesn't feel that this is just a one and done, but that you're going to come back and schedule another engagement with that individual and just make sure that the conversation continues. Mm-hmm. So, you know, based on this, I'm interested, Jesse, in what do you think the most important takeaway of all this is in a CARE conversation?
Yeah, and I think you kind of nailed it, Brad, with what you said earlier, and it's that overall, you do not need to be a therapist to engage in a productive conversation, right? Your job is not to fix the person's problems. Your job is to show up, empathetically listen, and to help that person to feel seen and to feel heard, right? And once we're doing that, you take that information that you gather while you're actively listening, then you're able to figure out, hey, which direction do we need to go? Am I able to help with this? Is this out of the scope of what I'm capable of doing? Can we direct you to appropriate resources that are going to be most beneficial for you? But it's really important to know that in order to step in and have a conversation like that, you do not need training. You just need to be a human, be willing to listen and care, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of, I think, the main point for me that I always like to try and convey. And it's because, like, talking is our early warning mechanism as a human being. So everybody feels negative. Everybody experiences negative emotions. But our society is really kind of built around this idea that we don't talk about that as much. We'll talk about positive things, but not as much negative things, right? And so sometimes we don't even know how close we are to the edge without really talking about it. So the people who never break down might not ever even realize how close they've gotten to that point without having a conversation. And so the earlier that we can start to have those conversations, the better we can start to help people really figure out where they're at. Because the benefit of that conversation, you know, say you and I talking here today, it might not be for me or for you, but it might actually be for somebody who's listening out there who hears us share our story or talk about something. And it really helps them kind of figure out where they are actually at and what they want to do next about that. Mm-hmm. And so these conversations, again, it's not about the conversation in isolation. It's about the idea that it spreads, that it's okay to talk about these things and help people understand where they're really at. Awesome. And so what we do know is that, like, prevalence of mental illness overall is lower in men than women. That could be for a number of reasons. Women actually seek therapy at rates significantly higher than men. And so what we run into is that potentially mental illness is diagnosed at lower rates within the male population because they're not actually ever seeking support or treatment for it. So it doesn't mean that it's necessarily that there's a lower prevalence of that illness within the male population. It just means they have different behaviors about how to try and go handle it, which makes it more difficult for us to understand exactly what the true rates are. And it's because at the end of the day, like, not all men are wired or have the life experience or the skill set to engage in a productive conversation like this. Talk therapy in its traditional form isn't going to work for all males because of those societal ideas, because of their upbringing, because of the roles and influences in their life that shape how they feel like it's okay to behave. And so those factors combined with scientific differences in brain chemistry and brain function between male and female populations means that there are different things that will be effective to help males than females. And so if we're aware of that, then we can act to try and make sure that people are accessing those more beneficial resources for them in the long run, which is, again, I think a super important part of this idea around having a conversation that directing a man to therapy isn't necessarily going to be the most beneficial thing for him. Research is now showing that males prefer more action-oriented or like shoulder-to-shoulder type interventions. So there's been an effort to move therapy to settings that are maybe outdoors or taking place in traditional environments where males are typically interacting to try and increase that comfortability to have conversations like this. One example is something called the men's shed, where men get together and engage in different activities with the idea of, hey, if we showed up and just said, hey, talk about our feelings, it might not be that easy for us to do that. But, if we show up and maybe start, working on some wood or playing golf, over time, maybe we can open up and get comfortable to a place where we can really start to talk about something that's meaningful. And so it's trying to enable men to use their strengths in order to address this challenge of mental health, and not just trying to say these traditional ways of dealing with this are going to work for everybody. Right? Men have different strengths. Let's use a strengths-based approach to try and help them as we're doing this.
Right. It's interesting that you say that. Like, I really enjoy playing hockey, and I still play in an old timers league every Friday. And the conversations that we're able to have following over a beer for some or a mocktail for others, they're awesome.
Yeah,
they're awesome conversations, and they just wouldn't happen unless we put ourselves in that environment, shoulder to shoulder, and talk about a lot of stuff. So. Yeah.
And it's interesting, Brad, because ultimately what these environments are doing is just creating a psychologically safe space for men, right? And what we're learning is that psychologically safe space might feel different for men than for women when it comes to engaging in their mental health. And so this idea of psychological safety, it actually brings us to our next poll question, which is, when you hear the phrase psychological safety, what words or phrases come to mind? And so, love to hear kind of just the answers as they come in here from the chat. And Brad, I think I'd be remiss. We have an expert in the room here. You've spent a lot of years, helping a lot of people establish cultures like this within their workplace. How do we actually go about creating that culture of psychological safety for people?
Yeah, this is my sweet spot. I live and breathe working with organizations to really put as a priority one creation of a psychologically safe workplace. And really what that means is do everything you can to create an environment where people feel safe, they feel engaged, they feel rewarded for their efforts, and not afraid to bring new ideas, suggestions, feedback into the organization. And I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with thousands of organizations over the years, and the best leaders and the best organizations, people want to come to work. They're not waking up in the morning and dreading getting out of bed, because the environment is one that they want to be part of. They want to come to work, they want to engage with people, and they want to create whatever products or services they are doing, and do it as a team. And I think what's really important is for everyone that's out there and leaders that are running organizations, and when I say leaders, I don't want to say it as a position. Leadership is everyone. You can bring great ideas forward, you can lead by example and really walk the talk. So show your team that you're engaged. The best organizations, everyone in the organization knows that you're truly engaged and that you care about what they have to offer. And you know, you talk about care and having discussions. You know, I mentioned, and I have no hesitancy to say this, I'm so fortunate to work with a company like Headversity and Respect Group, because we're all about creating psychologically safe workplaces and giving the tools to people to be better. So for me, that's my passion. I don't look at it as work.
Yeah.
I look at it as we have an opportunity to change the world here and the people in it. So, you know, psychological safe workplaces, I again live and breathe it. You know, avoid blaming to build trust. Avoid water cooler talk, you know, glass half full. Nip negativity in the workplace. You know, when I have people come up to me and they want to talk about, you know, some gossip by the water cooler, I don't want to be part of that, right? I'm here to make a difference. And, you know, the law of attraction, if you're talking negative, you're going to bring more back to you. So, you know, psychologically safe workplaces are ones where people don't want to talk negative. They want to, you know, bring good ideas forward, know they're recognized, know they're engaged, and, you know, be self-aware. One of the things that, you know, our programming does at Respect Group is have people look in the mirror after and say, how am I showing up? How am I going to show up at work to not only get what I want, but to ensure that the people around me get what they want, and to really work in sync. And so, you know, take ownership and hold others accountable in your organization to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like bullying, abuse, harassment, discrimination shouldn't take place in any organization. And the best organizations make that very clear. They educate their employees on it, and there's no wiggle room. If any of that behavior exists, there's the door. And if everyone starts doing this, you're going to have a lot more psychologically safe workplaces out there. So be a champion. You know, I've done a lot of work around this, and you know, the number one indicator linked to job satisfaction is, do I and my work matter? And the best organizations show that on a daily basis. And yeah, so I could talk for another hour on this, but I'm pretty passionate about it.
Absolutely. I think just from my own life, Brad, like I would say, even in more, you know, male-dominated areas like sports and, you know, even a professional sports locker room, the most successful groups that I was ever a part of were ones where psychological safety absolutely existed. Everybody understood that differences between, you know, the different members of the team were normal and were actually welcomed, because everybody, what they brought uniquely contributed to the, you know, the higher level outcome that we could eventually get to. Because if you've got everybody with the same thinking pattern and the same, you know, the same strengths and the same skills, eventually you kind of run in, you figure out we're missing these things. And so that diversity of opinions, that diversity of personality, of ideas, is so powerful for kind of raising that high watermark that you can eventually get to. So I couldn't agree with you more based on that experience. And so with that, I think we can kind of transition just into some key takeaways from today's presentation. And first and foremost, it's just that stigma is still playing a crucial role in how men are approaching their mental health. And so stigma, as we discussed, it comes in a few different forms. It can be systemic, it can be from the public, it can be from yourself. And males are struggling still with this this stigma around the idea of traditional masculinity and how they are supposed to behave and act and respond in relation to their emotions and their feelings. Something that we continue to need to work towards, allowing people to understand that vulnerability is a good thing, right? It can be a very powerful tool, and it is not necessarily a sign of weakness. The other thing is that the current state of men's health shows that males are at a greater risk of suicide and loneliness. And so we talked a little bit about just some of the statistics relating to that and kind of how serious some of those risks are. And so I think just highlighting those is great, because it makes people realize that there is a bit of an epidemic in relation to male suicide, and we really do want to try and curb that, because we want people to be present and living their lives here as opposed to having to go through that. And then finally, just how can we combat this, right? And so the number one thing is encouraging those honest conversations. You do not need to be a therapist. You just need to show up, actively listen, and allow the other person to be seen, to be heard. We need to continue to normalize vulnerability. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is actually a strength to be able to convey to others how you feel in a way that kind of respects them and works towards better outcomes for everybody. And then finally, seeking out those therapeutic hobbies, right? And so Brad mentioned the idea of playing men's league hockey. It could be woodworking, could be hiking, whatever fills your bucket up. You need to be able to have something in your life that you say, I enjoy doing that. That makes me happy, right? And if you currently don't have something like that in your life, maybe one of the best exercises that you could come away with from today is to try and come up with one thing that you currently know would bring you some happiness, and finding a way to work out how to incorporate that into your life over the next 2 days, 4 days, over the next week, right? So that we can get back to engaging with those things that help fill us up. Because life can be really challenging at times, like we talked about. And so, engaging with those hobbies that are meaningful to us, hopefully around other people as well, right? So that we can get that social connection too, is just super powerful to help address this issue of men's mental health. And so, and absolutely. And so, having said all that, Brad, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts as we close up here too.
That was great, Jesse. I enjoy working with you.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I enjoy working with you as well.
So I think one of the big takeaways and something that I always really try and get across to organizations is give your people the tools to be better, right? There's lots of resources out there. There's unlimited education opportunities for your employees. And, as I said earlier, we're fortunate to be in the business that we're in, with Headversity and Respect Group. We have the opportunity to make differences in organizations and in people's lives. And, we obviously welcome conversations with every type of organization, because at the end of the day, your most important asset are your people. And if you show them that and show them that you really care and that you're in an environment that they don't want to leave, that's a winning recipe. And so I think, making good people better by enabling them with opportunities to be more resilient, deal with adversity in a better manner, and respect one another is really the secret sauce here. And have conversations, as you said, like talk about this stuff, and let's break the stigma down. Men, we don't have to tough it out, right? Like this whole pull up your socks and pull up your bootstraps, don't cry. I'm a big crier. My kids call me Sponge Brad Squarepants because I don't hesitate to cry. And I think it's healthy. Yeah. So what the hell? Like, let's get the Kleenex out and show your feelings. And so I think we're going to move to wrap up questions. We're approaching the end of the hour, and I'm going to turn it over to Katie, who's helping us today, and she's going to share with us some questions that have come in, and we look forward to answering them.
Yeah, for sure. So our first question here is, can you provide an example of a success story within an organization where there was an impactful change for employees after a shift in how they approached mental health stigma?
Yeah, I could answer that one. This actually has occurred in our company, Respect Group, and probably about 7 or 8 years ago, we developed a team called the wellness team, and there was there was 4 of us at times, 5, but our whole focus was really to provide employees the opportunity to talk about what makes them feel good. It could be, here's some recipes for a great dish that we had last night. Here's a list of great movies that we should all consider watching, and we had each person do reviews, like, why should I watch that movie? and just created opportunities for our teams to engage with one another in environments that traditionally didn't happen. Like, in workplaces we have common people we're talking to on a daily basis, but there's colleagues that unless you make the effort to talk to them, you're not connecting. And so one of the things that we did was we came up with a list every week of who you're going to talk to next week. And it was random pairings, and what came out of that was amazing feedback, is that one, people really appreciated having some structure to engagement, whether that be a social event, whether that be talking to a individual in your workplace that you never talk to. And it just created new friendships and greater opportunities for collaboration. So that, I think, was one of the most telling tale, that if you put the effort in your organizations to create wellness and create connectivity, again, it's the secret sauce.
Absolutely.
And so that's a good example, I think. Katie?
Great answer.
Okay, and we have another question here. What proactive measures can be implemented at the individual, community, and societal levels to prevent mental health issues in men from escalating?
I think I can take that one. You know what, I think it actually dovetails quite nicely off of sort of what you were just chatting about, Brad, where it's really just, it's how are we, like I'd mentioned before, in relation to the idea of men, we want to try and use that strengths-based approach. So, we understand that men, have different requirements to potentially be able to engage in these things. And so how are we setting them up for success? How are we creating that psychologically safe environment, like we talked about, to allow them to engage like that? And so love the examples that you gave of finding scheduled time for people to connect, sharing recipes, different things like we talked about, things that make you happy in life. How do we get those and share those with other people? And it's really just building on that idea. And to serve men more specifically, we just might need to continue to take it a little bit further and say, hey, at work, maybe there's an employee resource group that's set up specifically for males who like to connect over cars, right? And so, every couple weekends, that group of people gets together and they start to engage over that hobby, right? It's just being deliberate with creating those opportunities. If there's, if you think about, if there's a wellness group at work and you think about the demographic of who sits on that committee, right? Do we have male representation on it? And not from a perspective of, they need their opinion in there, more of just are we truly considering how these activities are going to be experienced by everybody, and just making sure that, there's opportunities that might be more geared towards serving different types of people at different time. Because again, everybody's unique. Everybody has their own requirements for what's going to work for them. So how do we just create those different opportunities for everybody, I think is kind of where the focus needs to stay there.
Well, and on that, Jesse, what I came across doing a bit of research for this, a group in the States called Dudes with Dogs. And it was all about guys that love their dogs and getting together with other guys that love their dogs and just connecting.
It's awesome.
Having conversation.
Absolutely.
And I've got 2 big dogs, and I might start that up in Calgary here, Dudes with Dogs. Why not?
It's a great idea. And, we were talking about, you got a dog, you head out to the park, you're walking around. It can create that space for a conversation that might never take place if you just tried to force somebody to sit across from a table and have that interaction with somebody. And I think that's, again, like those key takeaways that we're talking about. Those groups are creating a potentially better future in the area of men's mental health, because we're starting to approach it with a bit of a different mindset based on what we're learning. So that's an awesome example. Love that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one last question here. Well, we actually have 2, but they're very similar, so we'll just go with one of them. What programs can be encouraged in school/sports to promote boys/men from a young age to engage with their emotions in an accepting manner? Love your son Shaw and the Lowies. This one I think is for you, Brad.
Oh. Well, I think I've been fortunate enough to have 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. And having the opportunity to see my son grow up in an environment with 3 daughters, 3 sisters, and really instilling in him what's important in life from their perspective, and giving him the opportunity to be sensitive, caring, engaging, helpful. Yeah, I'm really proud. Yeah,
That's awesome, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
love them.
Yeah. I think it's a really good example of how, you know, when you see, and for yourself personally, obviously you're incredibly proud of your son, and you know, the experience that he had of living with people who made him feel comfortable, you know, not necessarily acting according to those traditional masculine stereotypes, and the comfort that they gave him and the confidence to move forward in his life to be able to do that is really what we want to try and help everybody get more comfortable doing, right? And so I think that, you know, the emotion that you're experiencing now is wonderful, because that's really truly what we want to, you know, help men get more comfortable talking about and doing. And I think it's incredibly powerful that, you know, you're living it here as we're talking about it in real time, man. And so that's probably
Awesome.
it's probably about as good of a way as we could wrap up the discussion as we can here today.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone too, and Jesse and Katie and Ross and Ryan in the studio today. This is awesome, having this opportunity and this platform to have this discussion, and let's continue it. We welcome continued dialogue with you and your teams, so feel free to reach out. You have our contact information on the last slide that you're seeing. So thank you all for attending today. It was a great conversation, and we look forward to many more.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Have a great day, everybody.